Now, the Daily Telegraph today revealed that Victorian Police are preparing to arrest a seven former immigration detainee released after the High Court ruled that indefinite detention is unlawful. This is now the second case of a detainee who was released into the public without standing orders for their arrest. Labor's now under pressure to explain what checks were conducted on these convicted criminals before they were released. And Shadow Immigration Minister Dan Tehan joins me now. Thank you very much for your time. Look, 7 now alleged reoffenders have been arrested. Is this getting out of control?
It is, and makes a complete mockery of the assurances that the Albanese government gave the Australian people that they wanted to keep them safe and were doing everything they can to keep them safe. It is now clear, and we have 2 examples, that they let these detainees go without doing the proper checks and balances and without seeing whether they had to let them go. They did it before the High Court had put its reasonings out, and they did it without checking whether there are other reasons, for instance, arrests or warrants out for some of these detainees, which would see them out behind bars. And once again, it just shows that Minister Giles and Minister O'Neill are not up to the job, and the Prime Minister should sack them. And the real worry is that over Christmas and New Year, the Australian people know that their safety has been compromised by this incompetent government, and they don't seem willing to even admit that they've got it wrong, they've completely mishandled it, and actually what should happen is both Ministers O'Neill and Giles should both go.
Look, it's clear that the government didn't have legislation ready to go in the case that the High Court was going to make this decision that indefinite detention was unlawful. There was no legislation ready to go. Do you think, therefore, that any alleged victims of the criminals who've now been released, do you think this is on the Albanese government's conscience?
Well, absolutely the government will need to take responsibility for anything that occurs, because not only weren't they ready to go when the High Court made its decision, but as we've now found out, once the legislation went through the Parliament after we forced the government to put legislation through, they still weren't ready to act. We found out yesterday that they set up a body to look at all the cases and then decide what will happen. We know that none of these decisions, that they won't go to the courts to try and get some of these people locked back up before Christmas. As a matter of fact, you know, we're very concerned that Minister O'Neill and Minister Giles will be nowhere to seen between now and Christmas and New Year, when they should be there working to do their job and make sure as many of these people are re-detained as possible. This is just a government from the word go who has not taken its #1 responsibility to heart, and that is keeping the Australian community safe.
And then there was also that story. We had the journalist Liam Mendes on the program last night. He's revealed that convicted terrorists were released, and that Mark Dreyfus didn't put in a request for a supervision order until just 3 days before one of them was released. But before you go, Dan Tehan, I also want to ask you about this decision that the Albanese government has taken to join with the United Nations in calling for a ceasefire from Israel. What do you think about that?
Well, it's the decision of a weak Prime Minister and a weak government. It's the decision of a Prime Minister that seems to have forgotten that Hamas is a listed terrorist organisation here in Australia, something that his own government has agreed to. It's a decision of a weak Prime Minister who seems to have forgotten what took place on the 7th of October, the murder, rape, kidnapping of 1,300 Israelis. It's the decision of a weak Prime Minister who voted one way in October and is now voting another way in December. It's the decision of a weak Prime Minister who doesn't understand the importance of social cohesion in this nation. And it's the decision of a weak Prime Minister who seems to have walked away from our key allies, the US and the UK, on a key UN vote. It beggars belief.
Completely agree. Dan Tehan, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.